Hello and welcome, everybody, to my Boomer Buddies podcast, where we tell it like it was and is. I'm Rick Reed, your host. And every week we bring you some really good content. And this week is no exception. It's going to be nostalgic and timely. And I'm so happy to have a great Boomer Buddy back, Mr. John Hayes. John, welcome back to my Boomer Buddies podcast.
All right. Thank you, Rick. It's an honor to be here, and thank you for having me. Before I get into the content of the show, I've got a little baby boomer trivia. How about that?
Oh, let's go. Let's
All
go.
right. All right. Check this out. You can see it's a U.S. flag, but I've got a little context around this. All right. So for our baby boomer generation, I'm going to say there's a majority of us born, including Linda Carter, born under a 48-star flag.
Yes.
And there's a fair number of us born under the 50-star flag. But if you were born between January 3rd and August 20th of 1959, you were born under a 49-star flag. And that's what we have here. We have 7 rows of 7, 49-star flag. And you may say, like, why does this guy have this thing framed? Well, the reason is because my wife, Mrs. Hayes, born under the 49-star flag. And that's the reason I married her. So isn't that cool?
That is cool. And does she know that's the reason you married Mrs. Hayes?
Yeah, I told her that on a second date. I found that out. I said, we got to get married. This is awesome. Now, I took it a step further and I thought, all right, well, how many people in our nation were born under a 47-star flag? And I found out that we probably did not make a 47-star flag because Arizona and New Mexico entered the Union just a few days apart. So we probably didn't make a 47-star flag, but we made a 46-star flag, and that was introduced in 1907. And that's when Oklahoma entered the Union. So I went a step further and I researched how many people, U.S. citizens still alive, who were born under a 46-star flag. There are 4. So between 1907 and 1912, we have 4 U.S. citizens still alive under that 46-star flag.
Well, I didn't see that coming, John.
Well, we've got those 49-star boomers in our generation. I think that's awesome.
That is awesome. History is such a big part of the baby boomer era. We love our history. And thanks for bringing that. That is good stuff. I enjoyed
Thank you.
learning.
That's awesome. All right, let's get to the material. So today we're going to cover the TV show Dennis the Menace. And the TV show Dennis the Menace was based on the comic strip. And the comic strip debuted in 1951. And the TV show itself aired from 1959 to 1963. That covered 4 seasons, 146 total episodes. And I continue to be amazed at how many episodes they pack into a season. That's awesome.
Yes. That show, by the way, they had to tone it down after the pilot because the way Dennis was, they didn't want little kids all over America being crazy like that. So they had to tone it down a little bit. So the Menace was even crazier than what we saw when we were kids.
Okay, excellent. And I think we're all familiar with the story. This follows the Mitchell family, which includes the father, his name is Henry, the mom was Alice, and of course the star of the show was Dennis. And we'll see that the show, he often interacts with his neighbor, Mr. Wilson. And as far as the show itself goes, it was in the top 20 of ratings for its first 3 seasons. And then season number 4, it didn't even crack the top 30. And I think that's what led to its cancellation.
Yeah, he ended up being 12 years old the last season. And I think the Menace part would have tamed down a little bit. He's turning into a preteen, so that it didn't work.
Yeah. Now, as far as the cast goes, the star of the show, Dennis, was played by Jay North.
And we dedicate this episode to the late Jay North, who passed away shortly before we taped this episode.
The dad, or Henry, was played by actor Herbert Anderson, and the mother, Alice, was played by Gloria Henry. And those 3 characters are the only 3 characters in the entire show who appeared in all 146 episodes. And one of the prominent members of the supporting cast, the Mr. Wilson, was played by actor Joseph Kearns. Now, tragically, Joseph died partway through season 3, so they had to bring in a new Mr. Wilson, and that was played by Gail Gordon. Gail Gordon is famous for his work with Lucille Ball and the I Love Lucy shows later on in the 60s and 70s. So Gail Gordon was the new Mr. Wilson, and they just kept on rolling with those scenes.
So the first Mr. Wilson was George Wilson.
Yeah.
Yeah, by Joseph Kearns was the actor there. Died at age 55 of a cerebral hemorrhage. You mentioned Gail Gordon came in.
Yep.
They did 2 shows after George Kearns died. He was credited in those episodes, but did not appear, obviously. And Gail Gordon, who played his brother John Wilson, like you said, took over.
I looked, then I scanned the recurring roles and the guest stars, and for a lot of these people who were on the show, who had significant parts, the Dennis the Menace show was their primary gig. I mean, they appeared in episodes of different shows here and there, like on Marcus Welby or later The Love Boat or anything like that. But a lot of these people, this was their only gig.
And John, it was a good gig to be on with the ratings high for most of the run.
Yeah, absolutely. This show was a CBS show, and this aired on Sunday nights right before Ed Sullivan. Now, did your family watch a lot of Ed Sullivan?
Yeah, it was a perfect spot for a show like this. What a great boost for that show to be before Ed Sullivan.
I'm a bit younger than you are. I've never seen the Ed Sullivan show. I never watched it as a kid, and I didn't fully understand why until I asked my mom about it. We had a ritual on Sunday nights. We would go to my grandparents' house, and they'd make the gigantic batch of popcorn. We'd eat popcorn and watch Wonderful World of Disney, which was on Sunday nights. So that's why I never saw Ed Sullivan, because we were watching Wonderful World of Disney.
Yeah, we did both, and it was a big deal. When the Beatles came on in 1964, I remember being in my pajamas ready to go, and Mom served us chocolate pudding, and all of a sudden the world changed. But we're talking about Dennis the Menace here, and that was a great show. And you mentioned it was on CBS.
Yeah, and I scanned some of the many guest stars just looking for names that would pop out. And one of the names I saw was one of Dennis's friends in the first 2 seasons was a character by the name of Stewart. And he appeared in 6 episodes, both in 1959 and 1960. Well, Stewart was played by an actor you may have heard of named Ron Howard. And Ron Howard left the Dennis the Menace show to join Mayberry RFD. So he was just on for a couple seasons. A fellow by the name of Harvey Korman.
Oh, yeah.
Who went on to be famous with Carol Burnett. He was on 2 episodes. And then there were some stars I picked up who just appeared on 1 episode. One of those stars was Gene Stapleton, who went on to play Edith Bunker in All in the Family. Mm-hmm. Edgar Buchanan was Uncle Joe on Petticoat Junction. And Mr. Warner Brothers, Mel Blanc, was on a show. One other one that I thought was interesting was Sandy Koufax.
Yes.
Great Dodger pitcher was on an episode. I watched that episode to prep for the show. And I enjoyed watching Sandy because, not to spoil the plot or the show or anything like that, but there's a part of the show where Sandy Koufax pitches to the grocer, Mr. Quigley. And it's fun to watch. Sandy's a left-hander. Yeah. It's fun to see the Koufax form, but if there is a pitch speed slower than batting practice speed, that's what Sandy was throwing to Mr. Quigley. But it's funny to see Sandy and then just see this ball just lob out of his hand. And not to spoil anything, but Mr. Quigley did connect on one of those pitches. So it's kind of fun. I'll recommend that episode to check that out.
Very good. Yeah. And there are also regulars on the show. I don't know if you're going to touch on them next. But you had Martha Wilson. That was George Wilson's wife. And that was Sylvia Field. And she kind of had a classic Eastern accent, the theater type where they don't say the R's, they say ah, classical Eastern theater type of dialect. And I like listening to her. And then Dennis's good friend, Tommy Anderson, was played by Billy Booth. Really enjoyed him. I can remember him very well from when I was a kid. I said, yeah, I got a buddy that kind of looks like him and acts like him. And then, of course, Dennis's nemesis, Margaret, Margaret Wade, the red-haired, curly-haired gal, that was played by Jeannie Russell. And then, of course, after Gail Gordon took over for Joseph Kearns, his wife was Eloise Wilson, played by Sarah Seeger. I just wanted to mention them because they were regulars in there. And you mentioned Mr. Quigley, the grocer. Loved that guy, loved that character. And he really shined in that episode.
And I thought it was interesting. I love watching the show and seeing the late 50s, early 60s culture. Mm-hmm. And I think in the Sandy Koufax episode, Dennis's mom sends him to the grocery store with a list. And Mr. Quigley is going to fill the list and then give the groceries to Dennis. I mean, what would a grocer do today if you walked into Cub Foods and handed him a grocery list and said, well, here, fill this?
Sorry, not today. Yeah, and it's crazy. And then, Mrs. Wilson was in there before that getting her order filled and got all the stuff. And then she went out and, oh, before she did, she said, "Oh, just put that on our bill."
Can you imagine?
It was all on credit. Just, yeah, they're
Yeah.
good for it. Small town USA.
I didn't have an opportunity to watch all 146 episodes, but I went to IMDb and kind of picked out some top ones that I enjoyed or that I wanted to talk about. And the first one, I truly enjoyed. The first one, the title of that one was The 50,000th Customer. And I'll give a brief plot synopsis that
Sure.
the local hardware store was going to give away a 5-minute shopping spree to their 50,000th customer of the year. And Mr. Wilson went through the math and the analytics, and he determined when they were going to have the 50,000 customers. He's trying to win this contest. I'll leave it at that. It's just fun to see. I really enjoyed the end of that episode because it was very heartwarming to me. I agree with the fans on IMDb. It was a quality episode. I enjoyed that one.
Yeah, they had a lot of good episodes. Like you, I reviewed a few and kind of got my memory going again because after all, I was just a little kid, but I always loved that show. And I think my favorite, and you mentioned it already, was Dennis the Dodger with Sandy Koufax on there. I have that number one on my list. I'm glad you brought it up because there's so many cool things on there. It's very Americana 1950s and early 60s. That one came out in May of 1962, by the way. And whenever you see Sandy Koufax or any other Dodgers on TV shows like Mr. Ed or Leave It to Beaver, it's really cool how they connected with some of the Hollywood area sports stars. And this episode was meaningful for a lot of reasons. This show did not feature George Wilson, the character, in person. Joseph Kearns, this is about the time George died. They still credited him on the episode, and his wife even mentioned him in the grocery store with Mr. Quigley. He was mentioned, but obviously he wasn't on the episode. And he coached the team for Dennis's hometown. They said he was out of town settling something across the country. So with him unavailable, they had to find a coach. By coincidence, the kids asked Mr. Quigley to be the coach. Mr. Quigley had ulterior motives because he didn't want to lose customers to the grocer across the street, who is a good ball player, and they're thinking of asking him to be the coach. So instead of Mr. Wilson, Mr. Quigley stepped up so he could, number one, keep his customers, and number two, he wanted to do it because the mayor said, if you represent this team and get Sandy Koufax to bring an exhibition, you can be the representative of the city and make sure that all is well with him. Well, of course, I don't want to give everything away. Mr. Quigley's with the team out there teaching antiquated windups and things like that. And off in the corner at the park is Sandy Koufax watching, right? Well, he gets recognized and all that, and he ends up helping out. And I don't want to spoil it. Go watch it. It's an excellent episode, and everything worked out for Sandy Koufax. It worked out for the kids, and it worked out for Mr. Quigley, and of course the politician mayor. Was yeah. Oh, by the way, the mayor was Lyle Talbot, character actor. Maybe you know him, but his son was Stephen Talbot, who played Gilbert on Leave It to Beaver.
Oh, wow. Wow, great. Keep it in the family.
Yeah, and Stephen Talbot was on other shows like Perry Mason and all that, and so was Lyle Talbot. So anyway, really cool to see that episode, and it's one of my favorites. I remembered it from back in the day, but when you're a little kid, you don't always remember all the details. But it was fun revisiting that one. So that's a favorite
Exactly.
episode for me.
Yeah, and I have one more. I mean, I really enjoyed the episode titled "Trouble from Mars,"
Oh, that sounds
and
fun.
that was entertaining for two different reasons. Number one, it kind of gave the view of how America thought of the space program in the late
Oh,
50s,
yeah.
early 60s, because this is the Sputnik, the advent of the Mercury program for the US here. And there's even some concern that there were
Mhm.
Martians who were living on the planet Mars that were going to come visit Earth. So that part I found entertaining, but mostly the comedic effect of this episode I really enjoyed because in this episode, Mr. Wilson finds out that he's going to be featured in the Graceful Living magazine. They're gonna his essay won contest, and we're gonna take a picture of him, and I found myself legitimately laughing at multiple points during this episode. So it's a lot of fun. I'd recommend it. And another thing I forgot to add, you can go to YouTube and see a number of these episodes, if not all of them, on YouTube. No commercial breaks. So I'd
It's
recommend that too.
YouTube is a great place to find these episodes. And I got to ask you, John, was that
Yes.
George Wilson or John Wilson that wrote that piece? Was it the older brother or the younger brother?
It was George Wilson, and I think Mr. Wilson had kind of a Lyndon Baines Johnson look to him, so that's how I
Mhm.
keep him straight. So it's
Gotcha.
it's it's the George Wilson.
Yeah, the space race was a real deal back then. I can remember being a little kid and there was a little tension about all that stuff back there. And not only the space race, but also the Cold War, the fear of nuclear attack. Go into your desk, cover your head.
Yeah.
We did drills for that stuff. It's like, oh my goodness. But anyway, that was the era back then. What was the name of that episode again?
That one was titled "Trouble from Mars."
Trouble from Mars. Yeah, okay,
Yep.
check that one out too. I had one
Yes.
other that I wrote down, and this was actually from season 1, episode 8, and it was called Tenting Tonight. I don't want to give too much away, but let's just say that Mr. Wilson had a love-hate relationship with Dennis. Dennis was a whirling dervish. He had so much energy. Sometimes when you're, a guy in your 50s and you're settled in life, you kind of want to have a quiet life. And there's this little kid that comes over and just innocently begs you to answer his questions and talk to him. You like part of it, but then it can get annoying. Well, this episode, Mr. and Mrs. George Wilson went camping for 2 weeks. And he came back on a Saturday so relaxed, right? And Dennis and Tommy, they heard he was coming home and they were excited because they missed good old Mr. Wilson. So he came back and he was worry free. He was happy to see Dennis and everything. And Dennis was just so excited and he wanted to camp. And Mr. Wilson said, I tell you what, you can use my equipment, camp out in your backyard. So they did. And he was so relaxed, he being George Wilson, that when he was talking to Dennis's dad, Henry Mitchell, he took his nerve medicine and he dumped it out. I'm so relaxed. I'm a changed man. I don't even need this anymore. Stuff happened that night while Dennis was camping out, and I don't want to give it away, but it was hilarious and so well done. I got to say that George Wilson and his wife did such a great job acting in this. And you could see the love hate thing going on with Dennis and Mr. George Wilson. Great
That's
episode.
great.
Check it out.
I didn't know that Mr. Wilson had a nerve tonic. What do you think was in that?
I think it was a lot of booze. Good booze. That's what I'm thinking.
All right.
That's the two I want to mention now, but there's so many more. I tell you what, John, they used to open the show with a scene, which is usually Dennis being Dennis and an adult with him. I have a clip here I want to play. And then what they do, they would do the scene and then they would play the theme song. And this is the one from 1959, I believe. So let's give that a play right now.
Come on, Dennis.
I'm in the bathroom.
Well, come on.
Maybe I'll try shaving.
Dennis, come here this instant.
If you take a bath, don't step on my frog.
Dennis, take off your pistols and get in bed.
Why don't we go down and have a bologna sandwich?
Dennis, get in bed.
Okay.
Thank goodness.
Mom, how come you always say thank goodness instead of good night?
Hey, there you have it. That sums it up pretty well. That was Alice Mitchell, Dennis's mother, played by Gloria Henry. And she was always exasperated, it seemed like. And her husband, Henry, and her always had to try to figure out how to just put up with Dennis's energy. And I thought they did a pretty good job. So there you had it, the opening scene for one of the episodes, and then the theme song from 1959.
Tremendous. Yeah, and watching this or reviewing this for the podcast research, I picked up a number of little tidbits these could just be simply things that I'm not going to say bothered me, but just little things that I picked up. Number one, Dennis's overalls had no chest pocket. They're just like flat here. I don't remember overalls being like that. When I was a kid, I had overalls. You put nickels in there, or pens, or sticks, or whatever. Like his was just flat. Was that a thing? They make overalls like that in the 50s?
They probably, I don't remember that. You're from Iowa. Maybe you need, all that extra stuff. This is a Hollywood thing, but well,
Well, I know. I mean, from Iowa, that was our standard school uniform from K through 12. I'm like, well, that's a weird set of overalls. How do they not have a pocket there? That was anyway.
well, that's funny. It's funny you mentioned that, John, because I'm a big striped shirt fan. Dennis would wear the white with the blue striped shirt. I always liked that he had striped shirts. I had striped shirts, and of course, my sons had striped shirts.
Nice.
It's kind of an ode to being a 50s, 60s kid.
Yeah, and also unrelated, I thought the actor Herbert Anderson, he looked the most like his comic strip counterpart than
Yeah.
anyone in the entire staff. I mean, they hit it out of the park with him because he had the kind of the angular face, the glasses, all that. He looked the most like the comic strip guy. I don't think Dennis looked like his comic strip counterpart, and the mom didn't either, or Mr. Wilson for that matter.
And we should mention that the creator was Hank Ketchum, and he did the comic strip. It came out in 1951. And at the same time, there's another Dennis the Menace that came out in Great Britain. So it's kind of interesting, pretty much different, except both kids were menaces in their own way.
Another thing today's youth would not understand, I enjoyed the episodes where they showed the milkman. And in our country, there is a day and age where a milkman would deliver milk to your door. I didn't know this from my childhood, but I asked my mom, I said, did we ever have a milkman? And she said, no. And I don't know, did that service cost more than just buying milk at the store? Is that the thing? Or
That's a good question. It was a thing. I think where we lived, they would deliver bottles, but not everyone. Well, my dad was a grocery manager, so he just brings some home, but there were milkmen, but we never used them in our house.
This may be my unpopular boomer opinion, but I enjoyed the TV show better than the comic strip. And I think I know why. The comic strip Dennis the Menace reminds me of a neighborhood bully that I had when I was a kid, and I didn't like the comic strip Dennis. I love the Dennis the Menace TV show, but not such a fan of the comic strip.
It wasn't always a strip. They would have just one panel where he'd say something. Basically, it's one little snippet line, and it was pretty good. But I understand the bully relationship thing. Dennis is aggressive. I don't know if I'd call him a bully, but I suppose some people take him that way. But obviously, it made you think of that.
This could be another unpopular boomer opinion. After watching the show again, for me, menace means a similar thing to like hellion.
Yeah.
And I mean, Dennis wasn't a hellion. I mean, he wasn't skipping school, smoking cigarettes, and stealing bicycles. He just had a lot of energy. He was curious. So I don't know what a different word than menace, but I took a little bit of exception to that. And I'd like to think that in this alternate TV world, Dennis learned as he grew into teenage years, he learned to harness that curiosity and channel that towards learning new things. And eventually then he got a college degree and got to work at NASA, working on the space shuttle. So that's what happened to Dennis.
I think that's a fair thing. Now, a little tidbit, Hank Ketchum, he was working in his studio. It was, I think, the later part of 1950. His wife had put Dennis down for a nap, but instead he tore up his room. Hank Ketchum's first wife, Alicia, came storming into his studio, and he didn't take a nap like he was supposed to. He tore up his bedroom. Your son is a menace. Within 5 months, the strip was in 16 newspapers, and then it went up to 193, and 52 countries carried it with 30 million readers. So the wife, Alicia, gave him the idea, calling Dennis the Menace.
I imagine financially that worked out okay for Hank, because in my research I couldn't find a monetary value of what the Dennis the Menace franchise had netted him.
Mm-hmm.
But I had seen figures for Charles Schultz. He did okay with the Peanuts comic strip. So I think Hank Ketchum did okay with Dennis the Menace also.
I would say so. Could you imagine growing up being Dennis Ketchum and people found out that you're Dennis the Menace? Alicia died. The relationship with his dad, he remarried within 3 weeks and they moved to Europe, and the kid stayed at a school in the U.S. So after going to Vietnam, he got PTSD, and they just were estranged. So that's sad.
Yeah.
Anyway, Dennis the Menace by Hank Ketchum became just a dynasty, like you said. And I'm very, very glad because I do like the cartoon strips, or I did growing up, and I love the TV show as well.
I stumbled on some fun facts. If you want to cover a few fun facts,
Let's go.
good chance of that. All right. Fun fact number one: Jay North, the actor who played Dennis the Menace, his hair was naturally brown, and because Dennis was depicted in the comic strips as a blondie, he had to periodically have his hair bleached. And I'm sure for a little kid, I mean, to sit there and have your hair bleached, what a hassle. You know?
I wonder if he naturally had a colic like Dennis, or they look it up.
Also, for you keen-eyed viewers, the house where Dennis the Mitchell and his parents live is the same house where Donna Stone and her family lived earlier on the Donna Reed show.
That's
And
good.
even Mr. Wilson's house got even more mileage because Mr. Wilson's house was also the Anderson family home for Father Knows Best, and a few years later became the home for Tony Nelson and his genie on I Dream of Jeannie.
Good stuff. Here's something that maybe you didn't know. Dennis the Menace became a show for CBS because CBS the year before had lost Leave It to Beaver. They jumped over to ABC, so they needed some kind of a kid family show, and that's what happened. John, you did your research well. I hope you enjoyed doing the research on this because I was a small kid watching this show, and it was fun to go back and revisit it because I had these impressions from back then, but now as an adult looking at it, it's pretty cool. I have a greater appreciation for the crotchety, grouchy George Wilson. John, the brother, was a writer, and George, retired salesman. So a little background on that. Created by Hank Ketchum, came from the comic strip by him, and he came up with the show idea as well. John, do you have any comments you want to make before we close it up?
No, I just want to thank you for having me on the show again. It continues to be an honor to be considered a Boomer Buddy. So I really enjoyed this research and the show, and I look forward to the next one.
I so love looking at these old shows, and I thank you for the work you put in. People out there, thank you all for watching. Please come back, subscribe, like, share, comment. We like to hear comments. And please do that on the bottom on YouTube. And if you're listening, you can email me at myboomerbuddies4@gmail.com. For John Hayes, I'm Rick Reed, My Boomer Buddies podcast. Until next time, we'll see you
Around the block.